Welcome to Meeting in the Middle, a segment brought to you by the Strangers Talking Politics podcast. On today's episode, we're talking about the federal firings and how they are impacting Americans at large, as well as Montanans more close to home. As of the recording of this episode, 30,000 federal employees have currently been laid off nationwide, with 360 of those being laid off here in Montana just from the Forest Service and National Park Service alone. I had the pleasure of meeting with Morgan, an archaeologist for the Forest Service here in Missoula, who was let go on Valentine's Day for, quote, poor performance as part of the Dogebag's mass firings. Why don't we start and you can introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners.
Okay. My name's Morgan. I go by ArchaeoWolf on social media, TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and stuff. And I'm an archaeologist. That was most recently with the Forest Service.
Right.
And of course, there's that whole thing there, which we will get into, I'm sure. I'm a Montana resident. I've lived here all my life. Got my degree from the University of Montana over here. And
yeah, it's really interesting. I super appreciate you meeting with us. So we do little features in between episodes. They're bi-weekly episodes where we talk about the issues that we don't necessarily get in the main issue. And we really wanted to do a human impact story on the federal firings, because I think people need to see how these policies are playing out in their own communities.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was one of the reasons that we reached out to Morgan, was so that we could bring listeners an idea of what does this look like in everyday life. And so tell me about archaeology, man. That's so cool. Like, how did you decide to get into that?
Growing up in a small town with really no infrastructure for entertainment, really nothing there for kids. And if you weren't a ranch kid or, if you weren't a ranch kid, because there was really nothing else there was really no space for a quote unquote outsider. So I spent a lot of time reading books that, when I look at them today, are horribly out of date, but they formed a foundation, studying ancient Egypt, the ancient Mediterranean, what we consider classical archaeology. There's this whole series of books that Time Life used to make. And my grandfather had them all, and I have since inherited them, where you're talking about, focused areas, the Romans, the Germans, stuff like that, in history. And then when you come to the Americas, you got cowboys and loggers and indigenous peoples and everything. And that kind of formed this foundation of really being interested in the ancient past. And then, of course, in the thinking of a 10-year-old, I'm going to go out in the backyard, I'm going to find a pyramid. Just so happens my grandparents had built their ranch house where a ranch house had been that had been built like in 1901.
Wow.
And burned down in the 30s. So the trash pile for this house that had no plumbing and no refrigeration stuff was essentially in their backyard. And I spent time digging up rusty knives and spoons and bits of plate and cut bone. And that was stuff that, the meat and potatoes of what archaeology really is. Because I know there's people out there, when they think about it, they see Indiana Jones, which the only thing that we learned from him is how to punch Nazis.
I'm on board. 100% on board. I'm just saying.
But, the other, and then, so there was that. I got into underwater archaeology because, again, another book that my granddad had, and the first one of the chapters is about a shipwreck that Jacques Cousteau excavated in the 60s. And then there's another chapter about Robert Ballard finding the Titanic.
Well, that's fantastic.
So it's this, this is really interesting. I really love it. And, going through high school, couple things happened in high school, girls happened, cars happened, and I had to wear glasses. And you don't have any cool people saving the world wearing glasses unless you watch Stargate, which is hilariously everything I don't like about archaeology with the ancient aliens stuff. But, there was this character that I could get behind who was the archaeologist and stuff. So that was always this appeal to me of, just adventure and, mystery, learning about stuff, and seeing. I mean, I've got to hold artifacts where I'm the first one to touch them in 10,000 years. So it's like there's something to that. And graduated with my degree, got into actual archaeology work here in the States, which again is completely different from what people might think it is. Worked in the Southwest for a couple of years, moved back up to Montana in 2016, and then got on with the Bureau of Land Management as a seasonal, and then doing contract work over the winter. And then I got hired on with the Forest Service as a permanent, which has been something I've been trying to get for 20 years. And I was working on the Nez Perce Clearwater until Valentine's Day, when me and 3,400 other Forest Service employees were given the very ignominious firing letter that showcases that we got fired for poor performance, which is 100% not true. And I know I'm biased in saying that as a former federal employee, but some people got fired without a performance review. So there is no grade of their performance, let alone the people who did, where they are, like mine, marked mission critical employee, fully successful, which is the highest you can get without some sort of commendation where you're decorated by the head of the Forest Service or the vice president or something like that.
Well, and so to clarify on that as well, I had heard, and I'm not sure if this is true because I don't know policy, but that when you are dismissed for, something like poor performance or, what would be considered cause, that puts you into the non-rehirable category, does it? Or does it not?
It makes it a heck of a lot harder. When we go through the process of getting hired into the federal service, I mean, my first interview or my first background check, I had to give 8 years of addresses, 8 years of employment history, 8 years of where your significant other lives. I mean, you have to go through a pretty extensive background check, and in that, you have to disclose whether or not you have any federal debt, either back taxes or your student loans. You have to disclose that have you ever been fired from a federal position, either for poor performance, or you've resigned because you were informed you were going to be fired, or something like that. And I actually have. I did not meet a security clearance that was job contingent, and what it was my normal seasonal job started again. I hadn't heard back, and I did not fill out their additional questionnaire, and they said, "Hey, we're not giving you security clearance." I lost that position, and it went on my record as a termination, and I had to disclose that and essentially give them a report as to why I did that. And did it severely hurt my chances in getting this position that I was terminated from? No. Was it another step that I wouldn't normally have had to take and had to go through the process of explaining and showing evidence and gathering material together? Yeah, it was an inconvenience.
So it's really kind of like a kick in the shorts extra on top of just how everything has come down, that so many federal employees go through such a rigorous vetting process just to get in. The idea that then they would now not perform up to par or well after going through all of not just the training to become skilled for those jobs, but then the vetting process to get those jobs is that's pretty insulting.
It is. You couldn't get a federal job as a seasonal fixing barbed wire fence for the range contracts with a felony.
Okay.
There's a big conversation about the firefighters in California. A bunch of them, and I'm sorry if this is not the colloquial or PC version of saying this, a lot of them are chain gang. A lot of them are imprisoned workers who, they're on the fire line, they're at risk, saving the property and lives of people who think they're a burden on society. And they go back to jail and they come out 6 months down the road, 5 years down the road, whatever. They couldn't get a job as a firefighter with years of firefighting experience behind them in a wildland setting because they have a felony on there. 1, 2, however many. But, even with that extensive work history, they couldn't get a position as a felon. And I'm aware that, I mean, there's probably individuals who fought this, and it's case by case basis. You're felony because of a DUI. Well, that's not as bad as a felony for armed robbery or assault or whatever. But still, I mean, it's something that you do have to mitigate. And you couldn't get a job in the federal service as a felon, especially 36 of them or 34 of them, whatever it is. But we're not here to talk about him, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, anyway. Yeah. That could get hairy. That'll get us off topic. I could go for days on that.
I think we all could.
What are some of the things, I guess we just kind of covered the things that you did to become skilled for this. Mm-hmm. You obviously went to school for archaeology. You took on Bureau of Land Management jobs and contracts and whatnot in order to prep for your Forest Service job. What exactly did the Forest Service have you doing?
In this realm of archaeology is what's called cultural resource management. So any landscape that has a cultural value is something that's under our purview. If you have a mountain that is significant to the indigenous peoples of the area for spiritual reasons, that's considered a traditional cultural landscape. So that, you don't want all the trees on that mountain cut down. You don't want roads built across it. If you have Abraham Lincoln's cabin, that he grew up in, places, buildings, historic buildings that are significant, historic battlefields, stuff like that is all under the purview of cultural resource management. And what we do is any project you have on the federal level has to meet a certain criteria, or in the heritage aspect, where the archaeologist or the cultural resource professional looks at it and makes sure that that project is not going to have a negative impact on the cultural resources that are there, be they archaeological sites, historic buildings, traditional cultural places, stuff like that. If there is a negative impact, we then go about finding a way to mitigate that or minimize that impact. Because sometimes you can say, no, this project's not going to work, you can't do it here, and the agency or the contract will go, okay, and they will alter their contract accordingly. A great example of this is like for prescribed fire. If you have a site in there that will be damaged by fire, say a historic fire lookout or an old homestead, you can say, hey, this is not going to work. And what they could do is drop that polygon on the map off completely and say, okay, we won't burn there, because not all of it needs to be burned. And what they'll do is they'll move that acreage to another part of their project. And you have to address that acreage, but if there's nothing in that acreage, go ahead and burn it. So they're still meeting their acreage requirements. If they have to burn it, if it's something that has to be mitigated like that for the fuels and fire component, wrap the building with the fire stuff, dig a fire line around it, maybe go in and cut back all of the trees around these structures to give it the best chance of surviving. Or that's the sacrificial lamb and it can go away. Cabins that are 1 or 2 courses high, the logs, and they're rotted in, you can't really see. We might not even know they're there. That's part of the mitigation process as we go out and we look. But a lot of the time, if there's a negative impact, we alter the plan or we come up with some sort of walk around with that. And that involves the consultation with the state. We do the field work, we come up with a report, we submit it to the State Historic Preservation Office, and they go, yeah, we agree with this, or no, we don't. And we also contact the tribe, whichever indigenous group is within that area. We say, hey, here's this project that's being done. It's going to impact A, B, and C. Your thoughts. And the tribe is then able to weigh in on hey, let's not put a cell phone tower on this mountain because this is, spiritually speaking, an important place. You don't want to build something in the center of someone's cathedral. Same concept. So any government project, if it's on government property, government permits, or government monies involved, it has to be mitigated under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which says essentially the federal agency has a responsibility to care for and manage cultural resources within these projects. My program lead used to say, we're not in the business of saying no. So, I mean, a lot of people, I'm sure, have said, oh, you're just getting in the way and you don't let people do anything. No, we say, here's how you can get by without damaging this resource. Here's the plan of action. Yeah, it's going to make you a week behind. You're going to have to not build a road here and have to figure out someplace else to build it. But we're not in the business of saying no. We're in the business of preserving that resource. And the thing that I can speak to is that it doesn't have to be heritage for that same thought process to go through. Fisheries, wildlife, botany, all of these other disciplines that have been affected by these terminations, these purges, because that's what they are, have been affected by that. So yeah, as the heritage person, I can say there's nothing here. The research and the field work and the correspondence with the tribe has shown that, yeah, this road can be built, but fisheries is going to have a problem because moving dirt will introduce erosion into a stream that's a blue ribbon trout stream, and you don't want that. So you're going to have to do something else. And it might not be heritage, but it might be one of these other disciplines that says, hey, there is a mitigation that needs to be done here. So in respect.
It's an interesting perspective. I know I certainly didn't know a lot about it, but it's cool that there's this organization in place, right, that will work not only to fulfill the needs of the American people regarding their public land, but then also preserve it for recreation and for preservation's sake in many cases. That's really awesome. Yeah. What's the future looking like for you now that your job has been eliminated?
Well, it hasn't been eliminated, because if it was eliminated, there would be no archaeologists. That's one of the things I think that's also not being highlighted in this, is that not everybody is gone. It's just the probational employees. And that what is not being talked about enough, or I guess it is being talked about, but not with a hammer on the table, getting everybody's attention, is that when we were fired under false pretenses in violation of our rights as federal employees, we did not get any due process for this. What it looks like going forward is fighting against that. I'm submitting appeals through the avenues that are available to federal employees. I'm looking at getting a lawyer or joining one of the major class action lawsuits, because I was fired under false pretenses. Anybody in their right mind, regardless of your profession, would be and should be pushing back like that, because why do I get punished for not doing anything wrong? And it's a push to get my job back. It's a push to find some other income, preferably in the field that I have spent, over 20 years of my life pushing, fostering, and wanting to get into. But that's going to come with a whole slew of other problems that I don't think people are realizing. Because if I want to stay as an archaeologist, I have to go where the archaeology is, which is Nevada, which is, other places. And yeah, just go get another job and go be there at the cost of missing out on my daughter's horse stuff, not being around my dogs, not being around my wife, being away from home and living out of a truck in hotel rooms. Some people can do it. It's great if you don't have a family. It's great if you're mobile like that. I'm not. So, there's the possibility of getting a job in something that is not my career, is not my dream. This is my American dream that got yanked out from under my feet. And all of the wonderful people on social media who are unsympathetic because they bought into the Kool-Aid of this stuff.
Well, it's so much easier, to be hyperbolic behind the screen.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you're in person and you recognize people in your own community that are severely impacted by these decisions, it takes on a different life altogether. And I think that's something that a lot of people are missing, is that they'll be getting it over time, right? Because 3,400 employees is just one little section that's been laid off.
That's one.
Yeah. And that's just section. One round. And so I think it's so important, of course there's keyboard warriors, doing their thing. But I think it's really important to our listeners that we understand there is a human impact to this. It is not right that someone should have to forego their home
Yeah.
and move and be on the road, like you were saying, or miss out on their family because for what?
Yeah.
Especially when we're not seeing the policy play out the way it's supposed to. It's being labeled waste, fraud, and abuse. But where is that money going?
Well, it's not. I mean, it was never waste, fraud, and abuse until Elon Musk and Donald Trump said so. And the people who are backing this and the people who are supporting this and being keyboard warriors and stuff, they don't have a first clue on what this means. Because one of the things that is, a huge keystone of my job as an archaeologist is being a student of history. Not all historians are archaeologists, but all archaeologists are historians. And one of the things that we see, regardless of where you are in the world, but is really interesting here in Montana and Idaho in the West, are ghost towns. And the reason why those ghost towns don't exist anymore as places, living places, is because the resource ran out and the money disappeared. And the resources is one thing. The money is the thing that everyone can see. If you take an entire component of your population who's employed by the federal service and you get rid of them and there's no money, what is going to happen to every single other thing that you had no clue was attached? Because I'm going to tell you that the brewery I like to go to is going to lose out on money because I'm not going. Me and about 40 other people. The restaurants, they're not going to see money coming in. I'm not going to spend money frivolously now because I don't have much of it. When I was working, paid by the taxpayer, where do you think that money went? It went into my pocket, and then it went into the local economy. It went into the businesses here in Missoula. It went into the businesses I frequented in when I was in Idaho. The gas stations, the restaurants, the whatever. It's not like I took all that money from the taxpayer and shot it into space or gave it to the Russians.
I'm sorry, you didn't buy crypto with that?
No.
Sorry,
No.
I had to.
The only anything that I'm interested in is the ones that people are excavating overseas that I don't get to do, or cryptids, because those are always whimsically fun.
Right.
My dogs are like cryptids. That's about as close as I get to crypto.
Yeah.
It's the impact. It may take a little bit, a month or two to come down the pike and actually affect everyone. But it's going to, because not only are you going to lose out on the income from those people spending their money in the community, you're now also going to have the competition for employment. I've been told, TikTok is a wonderful platform. I've spoken about this, and I've had lots of people say, go learn to code, which is something apparently Biden said, get over it. But also, go get a job. If any of those people are a truck driver, their job's at risk because I can drive a truck. I can operate heavy equipment. I wasn't always an archaeologist. I worked lots of jobs to fuel my education and get there, which means I could come in and take any one of their jobs. And I'm desperate, so I'll work 120%, which means they either have to up their output or they're going to get replaced. Now you have competition from all over the country of workers out of every single federal agency that's being called now competing, which means everybody else is going to have to work a lot harder to keep their jobs.
Well, and these are highly skilled individuals, right?
Yeah.
These are people that have put the time and the effort and the money into their education, into their skill sets, and they've utilized them in unique areas where maybe not every average person in these other jobs has done.
Yeah. And there's a lot that translates. There is stuff that translates. Data entry. I've used more data entry systems than the hospital in the background of my work. If they hire for a data entry person, I could probably get that job before someone else who, has the skill set, but I have more of a skill set, and that's where it's going to get hairy, is when, you have people who are very skilled in what they do, taking jobs that are not as skilled as what they're used to. They can beat out the person who's trying to get a leg up. They can beat out the person who's barely able to get that position, qualifies, but is, because the employer is going to look at, well, who's better for who's who's worth more of my dollars is what it's going to be. Back to this money thing.
Yeah, and you have to consider too also, I think, is it's important to consider the concept that with this competition now, new up and comers who have no experience, how are they going to get experience when those who do have lots of experience are now competing for those entry level jobs because we're back on the job market.
Yeah, there's a meme going around, or it's been going around for a long time, especially in the archaeological and cultural resource community. It's that part from the Lord of the Rings where Frodo's looking at the paper and then he kind of looks up at, I'm assuming Gandalf, I can't remember. And it's like, so I need 10 years of experience to get experience. And that is the reality is, you do need experience in these positions and stuff. And yeah, I could go and get a job within archaeology, just being a shovel bum and, the base stuff. That means everybody else who's coming out of a program or, is they're off for the semester and this is their work to get through their program. They're going to suddenly find that they've been replaced by someone who is better at the job than them, not because they're not good at it, but because someone with more institutional knowledge has showed up and they won't get that opportunity. And then there will be screeching about that being unfair. And it's just this lots of loud that's not being focused where it needs to, which is up.
Indeed. I mean, that's exactly what it comes down to, right? Is it's another divisive tactic, I think, when it comes to the American people. So for you personally, what are you thinking? Just you're going to fight it initially, or are you just going to try to find something to get you through until there's some resolution? What do you
I will fight it as much as I can. I will be as loud as I can. And I'm subtle like a hammer. But I am going to have to focus on work. I'm going to have to focus on finding an income, which means I'm going to whichever allows me to pay my bills and care for my family, I'm going to do. And if that means sacrificing my life in respect to being with my daughter, being happy at home, being with my animals and my wife and everybody, and having that, I would rather suffer to take care of them. So either getting a job that I'm going to be miserable or being gone and working on the road, whichever comes along first. I've been in shock for about a week and a half. It's been, I got fired last Friday I guess the Friday before, but I got fired on the 14th. So I've gone through a weekend of being enraged, and I believe somebody asked me how I was feeling, and I said I felt violent. I'm tore up inside and angry at everything because, this thing was taken away from me that I worked really hard for. And then it was a week of, okay, reach out, see what jobs are there, talk to the people who in the agencies are still there and are very supportive of their employees who have been terminated. One of the things I do want to say is that we were not terminated by the people that we work with. This was a broad stroke of the pen from Washington, D.C., the heads of all of these agencies, with form letters. I've talked to people throughout the federal service, be it the Park Service or the NRCS, the FAA, communicating through social media. And there's one thing that comes through that every single letter, regardless of agency, has the same 3 sentences, which is the agency finds that you're due to your performance, it would not be in the public interest to keep you as an employee, and then you get fired. The same 3 sentences, verbatim. So, it's the shock, the reach out to people and see, the communicate with others and see what other people are doing, because I'm not a law person. I know people who are in the federal service, and they're going, here's a Teams call, we're going to talk about this. There's been law firms who work with federal employees and work with the union doing calls saying, here's what can be done, what can't be done. The reality is you might be waiting 5 years before they hear your case. Oh, and it's $5.50 an hour to retain our services for this. And then,
that's really the shit of it, right? Because, the federal government has all of our money to fight us in court with, and we do not.
yeah, the irony is that, where's our tax dollars being spent? It's fighting the decision to poorly spend our tax dollars. The money thing, especially with this administration, I don't understand how people can't see it. People saying, "Oh, he's fighting fraud." He just gave himself $18 billion of our money for a project that, I'm sorry, I don't want my money going to. I haven't wanted my money to go to feeding the six-figure incomes of politicians since I started paying taxes, because they're not doing $600,000 worth of work or whatever they're getting paid. I'd rather my money go to medical research or healthcare or education or supporting our public lands, because the reality is these agencies exist because when they weren't around, the landscape was getting destroyed. Before the EPA exists, the river in Ohio caught on fire because of the pollutants.
I mean, look at Berkeley Pit. Montana has a number of sites that, Superfund
sites
that have been just trashed because there was no regulation at the time.
There was no regulation because, one, view history through the lens of, in that time period, one, they didn't know better. But it did not take very long for people to understand that mercury will kill you. It then became it'll grow back, or this is an acceptable thing, and it never went away. And then it became, it costs money to clean up stuff. The companies and the billionaires and the rich are not wanting to pay those monies out to take care of the mess, which is why these agencies exist, which is why laws and regulations exist. Montana is big on hunting. I'm a hunter. The reason why we have a hunting season and areas where you need a special permit to hunt in is to maintain those animal resources, because if you don't, they're going to be gone, and quickly, because it takes one person harvesting 500 deer to kill a population. These resources, renewable resources, need time to renew, and resources that are non-renewable, like heritage, need to be cared for in a way that prevents them from disappearing. Going into the national parks and stuff, those places get cared for by the staff, so they are nice. You don't want to go to Yellowstone and see soda cans all over the place and trash overflowing, and that's what's going to happen. Public, we operate in this idea of, and I know we've all done it. Is the, well, just once, throw your aluminum can in the trash instead of the recycling. Oh, it's, one can won't hurt, until you have 100,000 people throwing their cans away instead of recycling them. That's a trickle down effect into the cost of aluminum going up, stuff like that. And this all the federal land, all the public landscapes are going to be affected by this in ways that people, they were never told, and they were never educated. It never came up, and it's going to come up at the worst possible time in the worst possible way.
Not to mention the terrible impact that's going to have on the Montana economy, because our economy relies so heavily on tourism to our national parks, Yellowstone and Glacier, among other places.
Yeah. So you're going to lose out on the economy that's generated by the federal workers with their money. And then you're going to lose out on the tourism dollars, because who wants to go to a place where the bears are eating out of the garbage cans that are overflowing, or use the vault toilets, which, what's in the vault toilet is right at the floor level, and they're not getting cleaned because there's not enough people to do it. Yeah, the Montana economy is going to take a hit. Every single place in this country that has a significant amount of federal workers as their base population will be affected. I just saw they're firing 600 people from Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. I lived in Oklahoma for a year when I was in flight school, and I know how many places are Air Force themed, because they cater to the people who work at the Air Force Base and are stationed at the Air Force Base. And all of those places just lost 600 incomes. And yeah, it might be a burger and a beer every other week, but that adds up in a way that is going to be shocking when you suddenly have this many people not putting back into the economy.
Yeah, it's insane. I think a lot about people with short-term rentals. Oh, yeah. People who, in one way or another, rely on tourism and the hit that they're going to take, and what that's going to do to the housing market. Because it's going to completely trash the housing market, which is already impossible to begin with.
100%.
And then on top of that, it's going to make it so that nobody can get a loan
Yep.
to do anything about the terrible housing market.
Mm-hmm. This is how civilizations collapse all the way through history. This has been, if the people can't be there, they're going to leave, and if they leave, things don't get cared for, and if things don't get cared for, things collapse. And that's what's going to happen here. It's going to become ghost towns, and the places that have an economy, that have the resources to keep going, are going to become overcrowded, because it's those places where if you need a job, you go here. That's the story of immigration, isn't it? You go to the places that have the resources, be it the job resource or the harvesting resource. Places will die out and not be habitable, and everything of value in those places will collapse, housing, whatever. And in the places where the populations get increase substantially because they have the resources, are suddenly going to be stretched for resources, and it's
and many of those resources require federal funding already.
Oh yeah. It's dystopian. The movies do a great job of actually showing what this looks like, and for some reason people kind of blow it off as the movies. But Blade Runner, it's this. You're in these places. It's overcrowded. They're gross. They're dark. They're dingy, and that's because all of the population is there. And for some reason, we're still doing it's just one soda can. Or, someone else will clean it up. The walking trails here.
It's only 300,000 people out of 2 million.
Yeah.
So it's not that big of a deal.
Now.
But it is that big of a deal, because even that percentage of federal employees deregulating what they're deregulating. I mean, we're seeing now, a plane crash every week?
Yeah.
We're about to come into park season, so we're going to see all of the things that are going on with the park season.
Oh,
right?
I mean, do we set up a pool now on how many bison are going to get famous on the news? Because how many people are going to go try to pet them?
And are going to die doing so because there's not going to be anybody there to render emergency services.
Oh, well, I hate to sound cold like that, but, it is the hello, consequences. I have done actions. The fallout of this is going to be incredible. It's almost going to be impressive to see if it wasn't such a detriment.
Yeah, indeed. It'll be interesting. So has anybody reached out to you to try and help you with not only legal action, but then also follow-up work?
A little bit. I've had a number of people that I have connected to through social media and stuff either drop names, have me send them my resume, point out, hey, there might be some field work. I've had people like combing the archaeology job boards saying, hey, here's something. I've had people offer to start GoFundMes and stuff. And unfortunately, I can see 20 feet ahead. GoFundMes are great. If it was a different situation, I might say yes, because then I could reciprocate in some way. But stuff like that are you going to take care of your kids and buy groceries, or are you going to donate to somebody that, you like their content, but, so, and I'd rather not ask for that because I know that the fallout is coming. But I've had people sharing with me stuff I wouldn't normally see about legal action, say, hey, I had a friend reach out and say, for a completely unrelated thing, did you know if you contact the Bar Association? Gave me information I didn't know. So there is a support system there. There are people reaching out saying, hey, here's what is available. Here's what can I do.
Okay, that's
something. It's certainly better than nothing, and it's certainly more than I think I ever expected, especially considering how much you see from people who are so vehemently antagonistic about stuff. And they're one bad day away from being in the same boat. The number of people who are upset because they supported Trump and they've been fired from their jobs, they're the same people who've been mocking and dismissing and disparaging, and then they're surprised when they receive the same sort of treatment, which, as satisfying as it would be for 30 seconds to treat them just as badly, all I can do is go, I hope you figure it out.
Yeah, we're all in it together one way or another, right?
Yeah.
Feel free if you don't want to answer this. This is okay, but tell me what it's like to see Elon Musk take a chainsaw on stage to the bureaucracy, so to speak.
It astounds me how blind folk are, because that's the biggest neon sign of things. And I don't understand how it boggles the mind. It really does. The number of people who are caught up with the flashy and the shiny things voting for this is astounding. I mean, It's political theater, yeah, but he's got the ball and he's running with it. And there are people who all they know is you cheer for the guy running with the ball. You don't know anything else about the game. You just cheer for the guy who has the ball.
It's such a weird time to see not only that we've lost so much compassion, right, and just basic decency and civility, I suppose, but the insult of how all of this is being done, I think is something that a lot of people are responding to. If you want to cut the bureaucracy, I think you could probably get most people on board for a lot of things.
100%.
But I think the way in which it's so egregiously, deliberately insulting.
Yeah, it's
to our neighbors.
This is petty, and it was viewed. I mean, Donald Trump made it no secret that he was going to be petty, vindictive, narcissistic little bitch about it. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who looked at it, and I could say that I did too, look at it and went, well, if he wins, it'll be another 4 years of him flailing about and a bunch of cooler heads like turning the toddler away from the sharp things, going, okay, you go play over here, and kind of corralling. Elon Musk, showing up in the picture and swinging around like he is and waving the dollar bills in front of the goat that eats dollar bills was the thing I don't think people really thought was going to be what it is. It's just, there's ways to go about this 100%. One of the things that keeps getting thrown out there is that Bill Clinton, shrank the federal workforce by 300,000 people. And the Republicans certainly want to hit everybody with that particular stick. But what they don't seem to want to acknowledge, because in this day and age, you can find the information to go, oh, I didn't know, that's bone laziness and I won't stand for it, it took him over 6 years. It took legal processes. It took mitigation of how these agencies would operate. It took appropriations bills from Congress to actually back the promises, back the buyouts, and stuff like that. And he did it correctly. And George Bush would have kept doing it if we didn't get involved in a shooting war, And the reality is, the United States in 1993 is a completely different animal than it is today, simply in population. The more population, the more people you need to run it. And yes, that includes park rangers and fish bios and hydrology professionals and timber cruisers. The timber guys got hammered in this firing as well, And if anything, the timber guys probably cycle through faster because it's one of the more difficult jobs and you wear out faster. That might be just me knowing how wore out my dad is being a logger. But, it's just this. There was a process on how to do it, and they did it correctly, and they did it in a way that was survivable. And in this, I think it's, they're chopping limbs off, and they're not putting a tourniquet on.
Yeah, it's the difference between honoring the American people and then making the American people casualties.
Yeah.
Very big difference.
And it showcases 100% that the rich do not care about us poors in the slightest. They are unsympathetic. They do not care. They are, for all intents and purposes, removed from human society in respect to being empathetic.
Well, Morgan, thanks so much for meeting with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
It was nice to meet you. Yeah.
Visit us at stppod.com. That's stppod.com.